This is Queer Across America, my road trip around the United States, checking out queer areas to show that wherever you are, you're not alone. Cleveland, Ohio was one of the top cities that I wanted to visit. That may sound strange because it's part of the Midwest and there's plenty of other cities that are much larger and more known than Cleveland. But I had been to Ohio once before in my life, and it was to visit a very, very small town called New Philadelphia. But that was my first introduction to the Midwest, and it was a really fun experience. So ever since then, I looked forward to the next time that I was going to be in Ohio. My Lyft driver was quite the talker. He basically gave me his entire life story of growing up in Cleveland. It was thankfully very entertaining, but I didn't really need that many words. He did mention that I should check out Edgewater Beach. I wasn't sure if I was up for going to the beach that day. My main focus was checking out what was queer in the city and what would be welcoming for LGBTQ people. There were a few queer bars just outside of the downtown area, but there wasn't a distinct LGBTQ plus neighborhood. Instead, most of the bars were pretty far apart. I did walk by Twist Social Club, but it was still really early in the day, so nothing was open yet. Next, I went to check out a bookstore, which is something that I have to do in every city that I visit. Book Brothers was like two big separate rooms full of used and new books. I didn't end up getting anything from this one because they didn't really have a section for local authors or really anything dedicated to the queer community. They had more of the classics, which is still cool, but not what I was looking for. I was surprised to see that there wasn't really a whole lot in Cleveland. It was such a major city that I heard people talk about all the time, but I wasn't sure what its thing was. I wasn't really sure what else to check out, so I took my Lyft driver's advice and actually ended up going to Edgewater Beach. And let me tell you, I was so glad that I did. Edgewater Beach was the place to be. There wasn't a whole lot of people roaming around on the streets because everybody was at the beach that day. I roamed around the area a bit, and the thing that was even better than looking out into the lake was people watching. I couldn't believe the diversity that was on this beach. There were Hispanic families with kids playing along the beach. There were Black trans people dancing and playing their music. There were a ton of tattooed people just sunbathing and hanging out. There were also quite a lot of languages spoken. I mean, there was maybe 100 people on the beach, probably less than that, and still I heard like 5 different languages. The diversity really was surprising me. Cleveland was not at all what I was expecting. I was expecting to really enjoy myself and see a lot in the city. But my enjoyment of Cleveland was entirely different than what I was expecting. I didn't find that loud, in-your-face atmosphere that I typically did in queer areas. Cleveland was actually really quiet, but it wasn't quiet in that uncomfortable way that it doesn't feel welcoming. It was quiet and small, but felt so safe and comfortable. It was very Midwest, but like for queer people. The next morning, I woke up way too early to get on a train. Thankfully, it was only a 3-hour ride from Cleveland to Buffalo, New York. My hotel wasn't ready yet, so I stopped into a little coffee shop across the street. And in that shop, I saw this poster that I was really excited to see. There was a little queer market that I was definitely going to. There was plenty of time before it started, so I went around the city and checked some things out. The vibe of Buffalo was strange. Not in a bad way, but it felt like I was in a simulation. While walking around, there wasn't really anybody on the streets, not a whole lot of cars going by. But every 10 minutes, there'd be like groups of people roaming around. It felt like everyone was an NPC in a video game, maybe like Zelda or something, where at certain intervals, they roamed around and said very specific things that didn't really require any interaction. To further show this strangeness, I went up to a business and it was closed for the day, but the hours listed were from 9 p.m. to 5 p.m. That started making me question if I was even in reality. Or maybe I was in a movie like The Truman Show. I finally came across a really cool spot called Fitz Books and Waffles. The place had used and new books, but the real gem was in the back, where they served street waffles, coffee, and they even had a fridge full of beer. Honestly, I couldn't think of anything better to have in a bookstore. The bookstore was really cool. It had two different sections. One was full of the books, and the other one was more of art and photography and had a little children's play area. I didn't know who Fitz was, but he had a pretty cool thing going on with his shop. A couple blocks over was the theater district. This was a really interesting street. It felt vintage, like I could see the past glitz and glamour of an area that didn't get much use now. Almost like the Titanic movie, where we see the ship sunken in the modern day, but then it transitions to when it was vibrant and new when the old lady begins her story. There wasn't much happening in it now. Well, I guess if you count those creepy little child pageants where parents bury their kids' faces in makeup, then yes, there are things still happening in the theater district. It was finally time to go to the queer market. I headed over to Allen Street to see the road blocked off for a bunch of vendors. The street was lively with local bars blasting music and lines hanging out the door. This was really the only thing queer related that I found in Buffalo. I wondered, if the event wasn't happening, would I have known that it was a queer area? I guess that doesn't really matter, because honestly, an event like this is enough to show that there's a queer community in Buffalo. I enjoyed seeing all the vendors selling things like taxidermy, art, homemade leather gear, stickers, shirts, and anything else you could think of. It wasn't long after that I realized I should probably not buy so many things. I only had so much space in my luggage, but it was really difficult because there was so much cool stuff. My final stop of the day was going to be a bar called Mary Shelley. Yes, after the author of Frankenstein. The bar was a literary horror bar that asked that people kept quiet so that others could read. I had never heard of that kind of bar before, and I was really excited to check it out. That excitement was somewhat deflated once I went in. The door person noticed my camera and immediately got defensive. So I don't have any footage of inside the bar. They told me that I better not record anyone inside there, which is pretty normal etiquette that I didn't need to be told. I would never record someone against their will, and I typically didn't record inside bars, especially queer spaces. Anytime I ever record inside an establishment, I always ask if it's okay. As I sat there reading and drinking, I realized why they were so defensive about me having a camera in there. It was a really intimate bar, and the people hanging out there were definitely locals and people part of the queer community. That's kind of the risk I take going to some smaller areas. And maybe I have the big city stank on me to where they notice that I wasn't from there. I completely understand them protecting their people, and I don't hold anything against them. If you're looking for a Midwest vibe that isn't a completely rural area and is safe, then Cleveland or Buffalo is for you. There's plenty of people that like the medium. They don't want the extreme of the bigger cities, but they also can't survive in a really rural town. So the great in-between would be one of these two cities. If you're enjoying following me on my queer journey, please give the video a like and subscribe to my channel for new videos. And if you want to join my community wherever you are, check out my Patreon.